Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the OK Grognard Show. It is Thursday, November 5th, 2020, 10 a.m. Central, in beautiful Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. What's Thursday? That means it's GMing Tips Day. We're going to look at GMing tips for conventions. I know there was some confusion about the title of the seminar. Campaign discussion usually happens on Wednesday, and I apologize for that. There'll be a lot of stuff in these GMing tips that will pertain to running campaigns, so hopefully that will keep everybody covered. And, I think for starters, I want to emphasize something. Let's take that down a notch. It can only take so much of me, bright and pasty-faced. Anyway, I think something I'm going to be emphasizing more than anything else in regard to running campaigns or GMing at conventions, even at your own game table, is the importance of not taking things too seriously. You are playing a game. Please enjoy the game. If you can't enjoy the game, you probably shouldn't be running games for other people. That, first and foremost, make sure you yourself are enjoying it. If you're not enjoying a campaign, if you got or convention games or whatever, you probably should not be doing it. I know it's a some people like to think of it as a selfless act, as if you're doing somebody a favor by running a game. But you're playing too. You're part of it. If you are running a game to try to please someone else without first enjoying it yourself, they're not going to be as happy as you think they're going to be. They're not going to enjoy it as much as you would think, and if you're not enjoying it, you really shouldn't be doing it. There is a whole... let me just keep an eye on this thing over here on Discord, because I do not know if they have any intention of popping people in and out over there. I have mentioned in the chat on Discord that the place to come to is here. It was in the description. For some reason, they have the 4 seminars in 4 different rooms over the course of the 4 days. That's a little awkward. But we're going to have fun anyway. It's analogous to the old baseball metaphor, you know? You're an adult playing a kid's game. If you're playing Major League Baseball, count your blessings. You are playing a game for a living. Now, it's less true with DMing. We've seen how anytime anybody jumps up and says, can I charge? Can I charge people for GMing? Can I charge people to run games? There's always a huge divide between the people that say, yeah, go for it. Why shouldn't you? It's work. Which I think is a bad attitude to begin with. And then there's the other side that says, do it for the love of the game. You should be able to make money. Well, I don't know. People are willing to pay you to run games. I don't see any problem with that either. But I don't think you should look at it as if you're doing work. You should approach it professionally. And this all plays into how you're running your own campaigns or how you're running games at conventions. You know, put some of yourself into it. Put some of your time into the preparation for it. Be ready to run that game or games, and have fun while you're at it. So, some tips when it comes to running games for conventions, whether they're virtual or whether they are on in-person physical conventions. It all starts with submitting events, right? If you've signed up for a convention and picked up a badge based on the fact that you were going to run games, because often there's a particular badge that you'll want to buy or a particular level of admission that you'll be in at if you're going to run a certain number of hours of games, virtual or physical. Then get your description together as early as you can and get it in there, because the sooner you have your games on the event schedule, the sooner people can start thinking about your game as something they can join. Even if they are looking at the events before event registration opens up, if you're out there early, then people are thinking about you as an option. And instead of because you worry, am I gonna if I put an event in, will it fill up? What is my minimum? If I have if I expect or hope for 6 players, can I still run it with 5 or 4 or 3 or 2? I've certainly seen some people that will run games with a single player. They feel, you know what, if somebody shows up, I'm going to give them something. Now, maybe they make some quick changes on the fly to make it work, but they're dedicated enough that if somebody has taken the time out of their own schedule to come enjoy a game. Of course, it's often good if you have fewer individuals show up than expected to let them know that. Be transparent about it. Put the ball in their court. If they feel like they want to do something else, whether it's with you or dash over to another table they see that's short a player or two, be open to that. Make sure they're having fun, because it's ultimately what it's all about, is having fun yourself and letting them have fun too. You don't want to force your game upon 1 or 2 players that, for your own fun at their expense. So be open to that sort of thing. So get your games on the schedule early, because the earlier you're on the schedule, the more likely it is you'll attract enough players to run your game. Some conventions will have no problem. You'll have more than enough players to fill all games, even if it comes down to being half full at the point of the start of the convention, and then finding that there are walk-ups to join. So don't be disheartened by that, but be ready for fewer players than a full table. Make sure when you put that description together for conventions, and this is true again, this is true virtually and physically, and even so true for putting together a campaign, for a home campaign or an ongoing campaign at your game store or at your home. Wherever you're putting the word out that you want people to join, be very explicit. Of course, you want to let people know the system, but there are all sorts of intricacies that fall into that. If new to virtual, says George, it's also good to have a connection session prior to ensure players test VTT audio and video applications. Yeah, if you're running a regular if you're going to run a regular campaign, figure that the first session's going to be, working out the kinks in people's systems. Does everybody have a good headset? If you're using video, does everybody have a working camera and know how to set it up and know how to, if you got rumpled green screen behind you, don't worry about that too much, because that's not that big a deal. But for goodness sake, make sure that you have a headset and a microphone that's working so everybody can hear you. With my convention games, rather than doing 4-hour sessions, which is what I like to do for physical conventions, for virtual conventions, I tack on an extra hour. I do 5-hour sessions. Much of that is to do the early checks to make sure everybody's on the same page on the virtual tabletop with their headsets, with everything you've got going in that regard. We sort out the characters. And you know what? If we do that in less than an hour, then we just have more time to play. And inevitably, of course, you want to end. Here's another tip. You want to end sessions at 10 minutes to the hour. Everybody's got, not everybody, but almost everybody's got something else to get to on the next hour. And you don't want to be holding up players at your table and making them late for their next game or next event. So be sure that you finish up in plenty of time. 10 minutes is usually the policy or what's appropriate, so that they have time to get to their next session. True, in physical conventions, sometimes you got to walk all the way over to the other end of the convention center wherever it's being run. When it comes to virtual conventions, well, not everybody's using the same virtual tabletop or the same interface or running the games the same way, and making somebody rush to get to their next event can be also disconcerting for them. So you don't want to put somebody in a position where you're putting them on their heels or making them off balance going into their next event. They should be enjoying their convention experience as a whole. And part of that is not feeling rushed, leaving from one event and going to another. And I should keep an eye on the time myself. 10:15. We got about 35 minutes. Plenty of time. The I keep jumping around from thing to thing, but to backtrack just a bit and talk a little more about setting up your events. This is true for your home campaigns. This is true for physical or virtual conventions. When you put that description together, make sure not just that you have the system, but also any variant rules that you usually use. Take a good look at, and you know what? I'm as guilty of this as anyone. Over the years, there are things that I do with, let's say, first edition D&D, which is what I often run, advanced D&D. I'm basically a core rules book guy. I stick with the main 3 books for the most part, which makes running games at conventions a little easier for a lot of people because we don't have to carry as many books, right? But also because it's kind of like a lowest common denominator. If you play any first edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, you probably have a player's handbook. If you don't, you've been borrowing one, so keep borrowing it for the convention game or whatever. You want to bring dice. You want to make sure everybody has dice. Maybe mention that in the description too. Just bring your dice and your player's handbook, right? Usually conventions have some sort of interface that you're submitting the events to. So you want to mention in the description, say I run this based on the core books, but here's a couple of things I do a little bit differently. And if you can be very succinct about it, if it's useful to mention before they get there. Now, if there are certain rules, for instance, one of the things I do in first edition rules, with first edition rules, is I allow, and this works out great for conventions, by the way, I allow people to swap out spells. So let's say you've taken in first edition system, Fancy and Magic system, right? You've taken a certain number of spells, first level spells, but then in mid game you realize, oh geez, why did I take? I would never have taken this if I'd have known what. Of course, you don't know what you're going to be in for, but I wish I had this spell instead of that spell. Well, I have a house rule that I've used for a long time, maybe almost always, in that if you rest, you can swap out spells one for one for 10 minutes of adjusting time, resting, rememorizing, per spell level. So let's say I took a knock spell, what I wish I took a web spell, second level spells, right? If I have my magic user rest for 20 minutes, I can wipe that other spell out of my memory and put in this spell in its place. I haven't cast the other spell, so that slot's still available. So I'm just swapping out spells for 10 minutes of time per level. Seems like a fair way to do it. I've heard some other people do it with 15-minute things. I don't know where I got 10 minutes specifically. I think basically because it's a turn, and that probably was my original thinking on it. Now, this is an example of a house rule that you don't need to put into the description. But when everybody's gathered and you've got everybody around the table, virtual table or physical table, or for your campaign at home if you're running one, this is the kind of thing you want to bring up before you get into any play. Right off the top, here's a couple things you should know. They'll be useful during play. I'm going to mention them now. You can ask me about them later if you forget the details, but let me tell you a couple of things. I would express that about the swapping out of spells. And then if sometime during the game I see a moment where someone is getting frustrated with a situation and I realize in my mind, oh yeah, okay, they took those spells, because I've seen what they've taken, and I realize there's something else that could probably, maybe I'll even nudge them and say, hey, don't forget, I know you're not used to this rule because this is my house rule. You can swap out spells, and I'll bring it up at that point. I might not suggest the spell they should take. I will sometimes, if we're at a convention game, whether it's physical or virtual, I will sometimes nudge someone towards something if the game has stagnated. I don't like Deus Ex Machina as a general rule, but for the sake of making sure everybody enjoys themselves, why not? If this were a tournament game, let's see, XL 809. That's why I would like to leave an open slot. Yeah, open slots are okay, sure. Swapping, however, does virtually the same thing, in between 10 to 15 minutes to an hour, proportional how much you're swapping, absolutely. Yep, yeah, there are a number of variations on that you can use that you feel comfortable with, absolutely. And, the time to rememorize might seem like a little bit of a penalty, but, you know, everything comes at a price, right? I didn't buy any iron rations. Well, you can get them from somebody else, or we can say that you would have. Here's another thing. For convention games, and sometimes for one-shots at a game store, game day, whatever, virtual or on at a physical convention, I don't like to muss about too much with mundane items. I'll let people know at the beginning of the game if they want to add anything to their sheet. Don't worry so much about the cost. If it's a mundane item, you want to grab a crowbar, you want to grab an extra week's worth of rations, because usually, and we'll get into this, pre-generated characters, when it comes to mundane items, I'll say just write them down. If it's something you're thinking of, just write them down. If during the course of the game someone says, "Oh, geez, I was going to grab rope, I forgot to write it down." Some DMs like to be very heavy-handed about, well, if you didn't have it on your sheet. I don't like to be that. I used to be this way, but I don't do it so much anymore. I just say, well, you know what? Write it on your sheet now. How are you going to use it? Let's keep the game going. What's going on here? Because, at the end of the day, you're role-playing a character. You're not living in their skin 24/7. If you were, you probably wouldn't have forgotten the rope. So it's only fair to say your character probably would have grabbed that rope. So just write it down. Go ahead. You got the rope. Now, as I was about to say a little bit before, if we're talking about a tournament game where there are specific rules and there's a competition, like like the AD&D Opens that they used to have at early Gen Cons. I played in a bunch of those, and uh, there are for the GMs, tournament GMs, lists of checklists of things. Did they do this? Did they do that? Were there moments that they did something special that affected how things moved along? And you check all that stuff off, and they write their stuff in, and they're giving points for these things. In games like that, you can't really get away with some of these things. You got to play by the book. You can't do the spell swapping. You got to play off the sheets. You can't do oh, you forgot that, just write it down. You really have to play a lot closer to the rules as written and not allow any leeway in those little incidental things, because all the GMs have to be on the same page and be doing the same thing. And again, lowest common denominator, this is the way we got to do it. We got to stick with this. But for open games, for games that you've put on the schedule that you're just running and they're not tournament games and you're not dishing out points for them, err on the side of fun. Err on the side of pacing and keeping things moving and making sure that people are having a good time and we're not sitting here scratching our heads or our asses. We're just enjoying ourselves and we're playing the game. I like this advice for campaigns at home as well, incidentally. I think it's worth mentioning. Um, let's get into that pre-generated characters thing. I'm a big fan of them for convention games, virtual or physical convention games. Not so much for campaign games. I think people like to make their own characters, but certainly for one shots at your game store or where you just want to maybe play test some material. Maybe you've written this next great adventure and you just want to play test something. Use pre-generated characters. Get yourself a baseline for that sort of thing. And for conventions, absolutely go with pre-generated characters. You can have some time where you take some time at the beginning if somebody, let people pick out the characters. Make sure everybody's there beforehand. Throw the characters out there or say, does anybody have a preference? Somebody says, I like to play the cleric. Someone else says, well, I like to play the cleric. We only have one cleric pre-generated character. Roll off. Whoever wins gets that. And everybody shuffles and pulls their characters and sorts out who has what. Now they're looking at them. And once they've looked at them, they'll have certain expectations because they have certain let's say, best practices for themselves for playing characters. It's important once they're there, looking at their character sheet, that they're satisfied that they can play this character, right? So if there are some things they'd like to change, and I'm not talking about taking a 10 strength and making it an 18 or something like that, although I should mention right here there is something that Ernie Gygax does in his games where he gives every player a certain amount of God points, which are points they can use for virtually anything. You want to raise your strength by a point, you use up one of your God points. You want to ask the DM if you could add a plus to one of your magic weapons, use a God point. You want to get a magic item that you didn't have? Well, I think Ernie usually does something on the order of a God point won't get you that magic item, but it'll get you a 10% chance on a roll if you want to use the point. So there's a little give and take on those things. But if somebody looks over their character sheet at a convention, virtual or otherwise, physical, then if they don't feel comfortable with some aspect of it, adjust it. Make some changes. As long as you don't feel like it's going to suddenly be overpowering or it's going to weaken the character to a point that they're not going to enjoy the game because they're going to find out that they've done something. Oh, my character wouldn't carry a magic sword. Well, you know what? There's a bunch of undead in this adventure, you're thinking to yourself, and it's undead that requires magic weapons to hit. I'm going to have to make sure you take that magic weapon. So keep those things in mind as you're making those adjustments. Make sure that what they are doing is not going to weaken their character so bad that they won't enjoy themselves, and not going to strengthen their character that it overpowers the game and the other players and sucks all the oxygen out of the room. So, within reason, and you'll know that's going to be a very circumstantial thing that you're going to have to make the call on for yourself at the time that it happens. Nevertheless, keep it in mind. That's the best advice I can give on that. Magic swords are required. Yeah, at certain levels, there are absolutely, and in, let's say at certain levels, with the caveat that against certain types of opponents, can you imagine a bunch of first level characters going to a dungeon full of wraiths? This would be, and I'm talking first edition, but I think that holds true across almost all editions and any number of like systems, Pathfinder and whatnot. Um, is to say that, yeah, if your pre-generated characters are way underpowered for the scenario you've got them going into, well, you've made some mistakes. There's another tip. If you're going to run something and you don't feel 100% confident, 85% confident or better, that it's a scenario that's worthy of being run at a convention, virtual or otherwise, uh, play test it. Get some people together at your game store. Get some friends together in your regular campaign, from your regular campaigns, people you know locally, or take a game online prior to the convention and run it as a one shot somewhere, and put yourself on the clock too. Do it in a time frame that mimics a session at a convention. And honestly, you can probably even do this virtually before you go to a physical convention, or you can do this physically before you go to a virtual convention. It probably crosses over. There are probably some idiosyncrasies that you'll need to be aware of, like the time it takes to make sure everybody's on a headset with a working mic. For the virtual convention isn't something you're going to have to worry about at a physical convention. On the other hand, there are other things at a physical convention. People getting there a little bit late from their last game slot, the time it takes for so and so who suddenly needs to run and go use the bathroom. Let him go. You don't want a player sitting at your table worried about whether or not to take a time out and take a quick run. So too, it's worth mentioning for running games at conventions or game days or even at home that if it's going to be 3, 4, 5 hours of gaming, take a break in the middle. Find a good spot and pick your moment. If you're 2 hours in and a big battle is just finished up, and you know that if they move much further along in the adventure, they're going to get embroiled in another battle that's probably going to take quite a long time, take that break a little early in the slot. If you've run a little long and you're, into your third hour of a 4-hour slot, or past the hour and a half mark in a 3-hour slot, and you realize that what you're in is going to take quite a bit longer, and you can see that the players are getting a little fidgety. Maybe you realize someone does need to use the restroom, or and it's tougher to pick this stuff out online than it is face to face, because you can see things face to face that you can't pick up on online. Nevertheless, call the break. freeze things right where they are. Just recap it when they get back. Put a clock on it. Let's say 5, 7, 10 minutes, whatever it is that you think is appropriate. Um, Make sure that if you have individuals that are, say, using a cane or in a wheelchair or infirmed in some way, that you give them a little extra time, or you put a little extra time into it for everybody, understanding that they're going to need a little extra time. It's worth mentioning too that accommodations for certain individuals are important. If you know, for instance, at a physical convention, that one of your players is hard of hearing in their left ear, then make sure they're sitting in such a position that their better hearing ear is closer to the GM. Because while they're going to need to hear everybody to a certain extent, very important that they hear you above all else. So worth doing something like that, or making that accommodation. Um, this is true with virtual games too. I had a very good player, a very good player in one of my games who has trouble with moving the pieces around on the virtual battle mat and stuff. So we just make sure that all of the tokens and stuff can be moved around by other people. So in a pinch, if we need to do that, we request that nobody moves other people's tokens around on the virtual battle mat, and this goes for physical conventions too. Don't move someone else's mini. And I know some people do theater of the mind, and this doesn't play toward your games, but for games that use minis and maps, we ask that people don't move other people's minis, and certainly that the players don't move the monsters around if they have that ability, because that is the purview of the GM, and got to make sure that the integrity of the game stays the same for everybody. You don't want somebody taking over the whole thing as if they're playing a solitaire game of chess and just moving all the pieces around on their own and not letting anybody else decide where their character is going. Let's see. What else we got? George says, the last GaryCon I attended was GaryCon 10. It was very loud in the large gaming room with DMs talking over each other. Yeah, you know what? There's a tip for virtual conventions. It's pretty good if, for instance, you're using Discord, that you have the ability to mute other people if it becomes a disruption. You want to make sure that if you have a player that is talking over other people or other players, that you have the ability to tone them down in some way to make sure that the game flow is proper. And if you're at a physical convention like GaryCon, like George was just talking about, I'm a big fan of making sure when I get to my table as a GM, get there a little early if you can. You should. It's usually for the best. You get first choice of seats, and this is important because I like to make sure I've got my back to a wall. Acoustically, it works the best that way. For me, for my hearing, if I've got my back to the convention hall and the wall is on the opposite side of the table from me and all the players are there, then I'm getting all this extraneous noise from behind me while I'm trying to hear my players, and I will have to keep asking them to repeat themselves. I can control my own volume. So if I'm on that other side of the table with the wall behind me and anybody's having trouble hearing me, I can adjust my volume up. I'm one person needing to adjust their volume up. And we'll keep that higher level throughout the rest of the game to make sure that that player that had trouble, and any others, can then hear me going forward with no problem. If I've got my back to the convention hall and somebody's being quiet and I ask them to be louder and then someone else decides they're going to quiet down because they've got their head in their books or the whatever, then I have to ask them, and then I have to. Suddenly I'm doing this conductor thing when I'm trying to make sure everybody's at the right level so that I can hear them, and it's slowing down the game, it's screwing up the pacing. You don't want that. So see if you can find a way to get your back to a wall so that acoustically you're more in control of the space and the sound. Some conventions just use the big halls, and it can be very tough, so you have to try to figure out the way to make that work for you. I think that's an important tip. Let's have a quick look through some of what we got in the chat stream, see if we've got some other questions as we move into the last 10 minutes of the seminar slot here. Let's see. Push to talk helps as well. Oh yeah, there you go. If you're doing a virtual game and everybody's got their headsets, make sure that people know that push to talk is an option if they can do that, and you can help them get that set up in the beginning of the game. Also, something to mention to all the players in Discord is the easiest thing I know. I think most people use that, but most other voice chat programs will have this option. Make sure everyone knows where the mute button is, because I can't tell you how many games, and usually happens right in the middle of combat or right in the middle of some exposition that you wanted to just kind of casually roll out without specifically pointing it up as being a big, here's a big clue, but right in the middle of it, suddenly you're hearing somebody crunching on some crackers or some Cheetos or some Fritos or pretzels or something, and they haven't turned off their mic, and they're going at it like it's the last pretzel in the world that they'll ever get a chance to eat. So make sure early in the convention or early in the slot that you make sure everybody knows where the mute is, and give them that example. You know what? Say to them, look, I don't mind if people snack. We all snack when we game, right? Or a lot of us do. It goes hand in hand with gaming, largely. And I'll tell you what, if you're drinking and you're not careful about it, just taking that little sip can be a little loud. And what about the crunching of the bottle? That'd drive you crazy on the other end. So make sure everybody knows where the mute buttons are, and mention, hey, if you're going to snack, if you're going to eat, hit your mute button. I've got one friend who forgets this all the time, but that's something we put up for friendship, right? If somebody is like that and it happens during the game, don't let it bother you too much. Just make mention of it. Please hit your mute. So-and-so, please hit your mute. And once they've done that, move on with the game. I'll spend more time on it than you have to. And this gets back to that first bit of advice. Dog barking. Yeah, you know what? The virtual... I didn't lock the door, right? And then in comes a dog and two screaming kids that they want their peanut butter and jelly sandwiches because I forgot to make them before I started the game slot. So, there are going to be things like that. Don't let it get under your skin too much. And as I'm saying, back to that original advice, just remember you're playing a game. Enjoy yourself as much as you can. I think we know from this last year of gaming that we've had it pretty easy in the past. It's a lot more effort to game now than it ever has been in our lives. I think that's true for a lot of us. So enjoy it. Enjoy it as much as you can. Make sure other people enjoy it if you have the ability to do so. And just understand that we're adults playing a kid's game. Hey, and if you're a youngster and you're watching this, enjoy it twice as much. Because one day you'll be hoping you enjoyed it as much as you enjoyed it when you were a kid. Well, I'll tell you what, we're getting down there. I got about 5 minutes left before I got to cut it, everybody loose. But if you have a question, you want to throw it in the stream chat, please do. We talked about environment. We talked about interaction with players. There's something too, because this comes up pretty often, virtually, physically, and even in home campaigns, that somebody just won't pick up on something that you're putting out there. You give a description for something, and you think most people have gotten it, or maybe nobody has. And you think it's the best description you've ever given in your entire life. How could they not understand what I just said? Well, try not to just repeat yourself. Don't get frustrated, but try not to just repeat yourself. Give them the same information, but find a new way at it. One of the things I do when I edit stuff that I've written, and maybe this is a good crossover trick, is when because it's so tough to edit something you've written yourself. You're too close to it, right? And when I go back through it sentence by sentence from end to beginning. And I'll read the last sentence I wrote, and the second to last sentence I wrote, and the third to last. Because when I do it that way, I'm seeing it in a slightly different light. Another trick I do is I take the whole thing and I put it in a different font size, or I put it in an entirely different font, and then I reread it. Oddly enough, that really helps when I'm self-editing. But for the sake of giving description at the table to gamers, make sure you hit the key points, but go through it backwards. Approach it from the end of the description to the beginning of the description. If you started off with the room size and you ended with this little cabinet over there, say, well, there's this cabinet in the corner, and then next to the cabinet, and start from there, and then spread as if you're in the room and looking at it from the opposite side. Describe it again, and then when you get to the end of the description of all the interior stuff, say, and of course, all of this is in a room that's 20 by 20. Whatever was at the top of the description. Because now you've looked at it from the opposite way. Now, of course, if that doesn't work, ask people to ask questions. Say which parts of it are not clear, which parts of it require more description. That's something you should be doing anyway when you're role playing, is letting people get into the details of it. Let's see, what do we got? Any other questions in there? Let's see. Proofreading from the end helps break up into pieces versus reading the story and passing something over. Absolutely. Because, yeah, when you're proofreading something, you often see what you expect to see and not what's actually there. So if you've left out a conjunction, the, in the middle of a sentence, and then you reread that sentence, you mentally put that the back in where it goes, even if it's not on the page. So, yeah, it can be tricky. You have to be very careful when you're proofreading stuff. This goes for modules, too. If you're running an adventure that that someone else has written, make sure to highlight stuff. Make sure to go through and highlight the details, and this helps with those descriptions as I was just talking about. It makes sure that you get those key points into the description you're giving to the players. And then if you have read box text and they didn't get it, and now you're paraphrasing it, you make sure this way by highlighting that you don't miss any of the key points. Well, I think we're just about there. If people don't have any questions, I'm going to wind it down. I want to thank everybody for joining in the seminar today. Very much appreciated. I also want to say to everybody that I've got a seminar every day at 10 a.m. It's all part of the ongoing OK Grognard show. This one, GMing tips for conventions. Hopefully some of that has also been useful for running campaigns. I appreciate it very much for stopping out, joining in on the stream chat if you got a chance to. If you were just lurking, thanks. Thanks also. Very much appreciated. Our regular schedule, and this will hold true through the convention too: Thursday GMing tips, Friday building adventures, GM reviews on Saturday, and rules retrospective on Sunday. On Mondays, we do weekly news and announcements, and cartography and world building fills our Tuesday slot. Campaign discussion, as I said at the top, is generally on Wednesdays. Tomorrow, for building adventures, we'll talk more specifically about building adventures for conventions. That'll be kind of our twist on it, since we're doing it at a convention. So, too, GM reviews. I think we're going to look at 2020, a year in review of virtual conventions. Gary Con, for me, Tabletop Events ran their charity convention to help keep them alive. I did virtual Greyhawk Con, the Autumn Revel. Rules retrospective will be... That's still up in the air. I'm not completely sure. Some first edition AD&D rules, though, almost for sure. So join us every day, 10 a.m. If you're catching up with this on YouTube, because we uploaded within the hour, thank you very much. Subscribe to the channel. Give us a thumbs up on the videos you watch. And by all means, if you have some constructive criticism, feel free to add it into the comments. Once again, this is the OK Grognard Show from beautiful Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. Thank you very much, and bye-bye.